Previously on BushWar.
I hear his voice, when I think of those battles. When I think about that offensive, I hear his voice. I hear him speaking. Oh yeah, Alexa, Avansha. You see, hey Alex, let's go forward.
Nee, deze spoor om te vatten is baie makkelijk. Maar mensen zoals ons, zijn spoor te vatten, is baie moeilijk. Je loopt krijgen waar hij net op gras loopt. Dan moet je hem op dat gras moet je zijn spoor vatten.
(1980). The insurgency in Namibia dragged on, a war of attrition. Rhodesia became Zimbabwe, providing SWAPO with another entry point apart from Zambia and Angola. The rivers which mark the borders were a permanent part of the war zone, drawing South Africa's mariners into the battle. At first, SWAPO fighters moved in groups of only 2 or 3, carrying the minimum supplies and equipment.
The SWAPO war was protracted. It was a difficult war. We have seen difficult times, difficult nights, difficult days.
Personally, I never thought they were very well-trained soldiers, but they just go out there, they're almost like the Japanese kamikazes. They go out there to fight and they don't really care if they die.
Spies were everywhere, but SWAPO had an advantage.
And when we want to get into their camp, we will pretend as if we are people looking for our cattle lost. And sometimes they could even say, hey, kafir, fat die brood man, and eat. They are feeding a gorilla.
From the South Africans' point of view, the insurgents had other tactical advantages as well.
Eerstens, die verrassingselement is nie jou kant nie, inteendeel die verrassing is aan hulle kant. Hulle besluit die terrein, hulle besluit die plek waar hierdie konfrontasie gaan plaasvind. Hulle besluit hoe hulle dit gaan doen en met watter wapens. So jy het niks in jou kant nie.
Border patrols by military servicemen formed the basis of the battle against the insurgents. The other component of the SADF strategy was hot pursuit. Units like Kufut and 101 Battalion were constantly looking for tracks and often followed their enemy deep into Angola. 3-2 Battalion spent most of its time north of the border, where they too were engaged in tracking and wiping out insurgents. The Air Force was often called upon for support. Each of these units had its own approach.
Was die 3-2 bataljon troep, sou ek sê, was die ultimate troep gewees op die voete. Het was 'n baie goeie voettroepe gewees. Met ander woorde, hulle was mense wat spesifieke goed, klein dingetjies in baie detail kon doen. Want hulle die jare soos wat die 101 troep het hulle die jare se ondervinding gehad. Hulle was nie voertuigtroepe gewees nie, soos wat die 101 troepe was nie. Wat ek dink meer 'n mengsel was tussen die voertuig en die voetding.
Everyone relied on local people who knew the local environment, languages and customs.
101 bataljon was 'n infantry bataljon wat bestaan het uit Tuwambu troepe met leierelemente van die RSA, en deur die proses het ons probeer om die Tuwambu so te skool dat ons kan minder RSA lede gebruik.
Dit was maar ons wat noord van die grens in Angola die infiltrasie van SWAPO moes keer, en dan suid van die grens was dit Kufut se werk geweest.
Kufut was the police counter-insurgency unit. There were eyes and ears on the ground the moment an insurgent put a foot across the border. They knew better than to trust the local communities.
There is no way of thinking of a home, because you cannot even think of sleeping in a home. Even if you interact with the community, they say, okay, we give you a house. You say, no, I'm not sleeping in the house. I will just sleep outside here.
Every SWAPO fighter knew that he was in constant danger. At any moment, he could have units like Kufut or 101 running on his trail in hot pursuit.
Maar die Wambos is goeie spoorsneurs geweest. Ek praat uit persoonlike ondervinding. Ek het baie saam met hulle gehardloop op spore. En dan leer 'n mens maar deur die jare hoe hulle dit doen en jy tel hulle die fynere punte op daarvan. Hulle het vir my baie gehardloop dat ek terugklim op 'n Casper en eers weer asem skep. Maar ek het op 'n stadium saam met hulle seker van die oggend 7 uur gehardloop tot laat in die middag 5 uur.
Gewoonlijk als je sporen opgeteld hebt, dan moet iemand op je spoor hardlopen om je spoor te houden. Terwijl die karre aankomt om je veerkracht te leren indien daar contact is. En wel dan heb je ook maar radioverbinding met andere spannen in die omgeving, ook rond het licht samenwerking om lichtsteen in te roepen indien dit nodig raakt.
The Air Force was one of the most important weapons in the SADF arsenal.
They had the air superiority. They occupied Angola, most part of southern Angola, and they had the liberty to go in and to come out and to determine all the activities of the operational theater. That's in terms of conventional warfare. But they thought they were going to create a buffer zone, which was a no-go area for the Angolan forces, not even for the Angolan government. So they were there at liberty, as if they were operating in Namibia.
Almost every type of aircraft was employed in the course of the war, but when it came to Kufut and 101, gunships were called upon for support.
Alouettes. The Alouettes were, most of them were fitted with guns, a 20mm cannon firing out the left-hand side. They were our gunships. And they were the best weapon we had against terrorists in the whole war. Not by themselves. You've got to have somebody to find the terrorist first. As soon as they find a spoor, they give a call out and they say, all right, we've got the spoor, it's heading east. It looks like there's 35 of them, okay? It looks like it's 8 hours old. And then we plot where these guys are. But as the spoor goes on and it gets closer and closer and closer and looks like there's going to be a firefight, then we look at the nearest forward base that we have, which might be, let's say, Ianhana. And we say to the choppers at the gunship choppers at Ondongwa, get airborne, go and land at Ianhana and put yourselves on standby there.
Jy sien manne met elke kontak maar sterf. Dis 'n ding wat jy mee saamlewe al jou lewe of baie swaar gewond. Was eendag toe ons op die spore gehardloop het. Ons het voorgehardloop op die spore. Die Caspers volg natuurlik op in 'n linie en ek het gou teruggehardloop net om 'n sluk water uit my seilsak te neem. En met die terughardloop het ek 'n geweldige ontploffing net voor my gehoor. Toe was dit 3 van ons buddies van die spoorsnyers wat toe ook 'n pomzet afgetrap het en 2 van hulle was opslagdood en die ander een was baie ernstig gewond. As ek nie daar omgedraai het nie en gaan water drink het nie, dan was dit nou weer 'n geval. Ek glo nie ek sou ooit weer daai nag die maan sien opkom het nie.
The wind of change is blowing through this country.
In 1980, Robert Mugabe came into power in Zimbabwe. Many South African policemen who had been serving there, as well as members of the Selous Scouts, the Rhodesian Rekkies, joined the SADF. Philip Joubert was one of these recruits.
Voordat ons ontplooi word na die basisse toe, het van die Kufut-lede na ons toe gekom. Op daai tydstip was die spanne baie uitgeskiet gewees. En nou ja, so het ek dan op Kufut beland, ook as gevolg van my agtergrond en ondervinding wat ek in Rhodesia gehad het. So ek was wel bekend met kontakte.
Many of the ex-Rhodesians joined a lesser-known counterinsurgency unit, the Pathfinders, who were only active for a short while during the 80s.
The Pathfinders are your more elite paratroopers, more in the line of special forces, and And the Pathfinder's job is pretty simple. He goes out ahead of the main attacking force. He will go and do insert by UG, Halo, or whatever, Halo, high altitude, low opening, free fall, or whatever means is best for the job. And they will go and do the reconnaissance on the enemy positions, and then they will prepare the DZ and then wait for the main attacking force to arrive. They will paratroop in, then the Pathfinders will lead them off to their designated attacking positions.
All these units noticed the same trend in the early 80s. Increasingly, the guerrilla fighters were employing the strategies and tactics of conventional warfare.
Each commander will change tactics according to the situation prevailing at that particular moment. You have either a general strategy which you have to employ. Tactics depends on the individual commanders. Of course, what we did is to find appropriate weapons to be employed against a specific new equipment which appears on the battlefield.
At the Tobias Hanyeka Training Center at Lubangu, fighters received conventional military training, which would change the dynamics of the war.
It was a tough training, and that was the toughest training I understand. Very, very tough. A training that changed even my skills for reconnaissance. When I came from that training, I was totally a new guerrilla man. We went to establish a unit called 1st Mechanized Infantry Brigade. We were the pioneers of that brigade. In that brigade, I was a brigade artillery chief of reconnaissance. From Hanyeko, I was now a mixed person, guerrilla and regular. Now, I was converted from guerrilla to a more professional militant. We established the 1st Mechanized Infantry Brigade, and then we still have to undergo a training for 6 months to use tanks, to use APCs, to use BRDMs, and to use all those other weapons which were needed, because that was a special unit, a special regular unit.
Cross-border operations like Skeptic indicated increasing support from the Angolan Defence Force FAPLA for SWAPO. With FAPLA came the Cubans.
They were there to support the Angolan government to secure the territorial integrity of Angola. They did not come there to fight and to go to Namibia to be an invasion or to bring independence, but they were there at the invitation of the Angolan government. They did not come at our invitation.
Furthermore, there were Soviet instructors and equipment.
In the academy itself, Tobias Hanyeko Training Center, the Russians were the instructors there.
As a rule, they were not supposed to be involved in fighting. Their role was to suggest something, to advise something, to help to keep the hardware in the proper condition, and to instruct a different way, you see, from infantry to, say, Air Force. But in reality, for example, if you are advisor with the brigade, so a number this or that, and if brigade goes into offensive, you are not supposed to stay somewhere in the rear.
Maar dit is nie 'n kwessie gewees van daar was 'n Russiese gevaar wat een of ander politikus uitgedink het nie. Dit was 'n feit. Ons het daagliks daarmee geleef. Ek meen ons is permanent daar en ons het dit gesien. Hierdie ouens is toegerus deur mense en die mense wat hulle toegerus het was die Russe gewees.
So you know that there were Russian or Soviet made aircraft supplied, hardware in the sense of tanks, rocket launchers, APCs.
South Africa's ally, Jonas Savimbi, also felt the impact of the combination of FAPLA, SWAPO and the Cubans with Soviet arms. UNITA wanted to occupy southeast Angola, but FAPLA captured villages wherever they could. Savimbi requested support from 3-2 Battalion to destroy a FAPLA base 75 kilometers north of the border. 3-2 decided to go in on foot and came face to face with this different, more powerful foe.
A guerra mais difícil do que eu lutei, a guerra do Sabate, porque a guerra para confirmar foi muito confusão. Havia muitos inimigos aí que não há meio para contar.
UNITA intelligence put the number of FAPLA soldiers at Savati at 300. In reality, there were more than 1,000.
Het was 3-1. Was hulle meer as ons. En ons met die rekkie-groep, ons het ingestap en ons het stopgroepe gevaar, jy weet. Aan die kant die basis. So as die mense hardloop of wat ook al, moes ons hulle nou afsny. En dis wat wel gebeur het, jy weet. Toe val hulle aan en ons was stopgroepe in die noorde gewees. En ons op baie stadium moes ons nie lug support gehad nie.
Eu estava a socorrer nosso irmão que tinha apanhado tiro. Então, quando assustei, a minha atrás, só uns elementos a chamarem-me para a minha atrás. Para, não moves mais, se moveres, vamos te focar. Então eu digo, ei caramba, então agora já sou preso. Eu levantei minhas mãos assim. Então daí disseram-me, ok, vamos começar a andar. Andamos mais ou menos uns 200 metros, ouvi o tiro atrás. Pau! Acabaram de matar aquele outro que estava ferido. Então eu daí também apanhei já aquele medo. Eu disse, bom, então já que mataram o outro, eu também daqui, hoje vou morrer.
It was total chaos. Mortars rained down, machine guns chattered. Everything was smothered under a cloud of dust. In the midst of all the confusion, Alberto got away.
Ja, en de stof, rook, geraas. Dit was verskriklik. Ja, dit is net sulke flitsse wat terugkom na mense toe. Ek kan dit nie meer lekker onthou nie, maar na die tyd, daai hengse moeg wat ons gehad het van die geveg, dit was ek wil dit nooit weer oor hê nie, laat ek dit so stel.
Of the 153 battalion soldiers who died in the war, 15 were killed at Savati. They achieved their objective. FAPLA was routed, but they received little credit.
UNITA had altijd krediet gevat voor alles wat ons gedaan het. Ik meen, hulle het schepen gesink in Mozambique, in Mozambique haven. Nou, kijk, je kan niet enige UNITA naby je schip brengen, hij is onszelf mosdoodschrik, je ziet. Hulle het die raffinade opgeblazen en met operatie Kerselig, hulle het opgeblazen, zoals je ziet. Hulle die dingen die oor die tanks opgeblazen in Lobito. Hulle het krediet gevat voor alles. En dat is een groot probleem, want dat steekt mij dwars in die krop. En ik heb het menige keer gezegd. Ons mensen doen die werk. En dan wordt krediet voor hulle gegeven. Ons kan toch opereren onder hulle, je kan niet onder hulle vaandel nie, maar onder hulle dekken. Ons wil niet toegeven dat ons bezig is met zulke dingen enzovoorts. Hulle is eigenlijk rechter waar useless.
The growing cooperation among different forces in the field had an impact around the negotiating table as well. The South Africans still refused to accept Resolution 435, the plan for elections in Namibia, if Cuban soldiers did not withdraw from Angola. The negotiators could not get past that. In January 1981, Ronald Reagan took over as President of America. The situation changed almost immediately.
Eerstens het Reagan getoon dat hy nie dieselfde weerstandigheid, weerbarstigheid en arrogansie aan die dag gelê het van die groot 5 Weslande nie. Hy het standpunt ingeneem en Suid-Afrika by daardie inval, take it or leave it. Die Reagan het gekom soos 'n nuwe brisie en hy het soos aan die rol gesit, soos het sy adjunk Chester Cocker gebruik en hulle het gewerk op wat is die probleme wat uitgestryk word en dit uitgestryk.
Troops sent by the United Nations presented another problem.
En ons rede was dat die VVO het toe al jare gelede besluit dat SWAPO is the sole and authentic representative of the people of Namibia. En toe dat Matschla en al die interne partye van ons gesê, ook van swartkant in Suidwes, that if they land here with their blue berets, then the whole nation will think they have taken over the UN. And it is the UN who said SWAPO is the sole and authentic representative, and it would be extremely difficult then to have a fair and free election.
Chester Crocker was responsible for Africa in the Reagan administration.
Had all we'd done is to insist on immediate implementation of UN Resolution 435 without saying or doing anything about the Angolan-Cuban problem, we would not have been taken seriously in Pretoria, and we would have not have gotten anywhere, in my judgment.
In June 1981, Crocker visited South Africa as part of a delegation led by Judge Clark. Pik Botha argued South Africa's case.
Toe kom Clark met die uiters verrassende, soos 'n weerligstraal van vreugde, en sê, but what will be your position if we can get rid of the Cubans? En toe sê ek, totally new ballgame. Totally new. Die Amerikaners wil genoem linkage, die oorkoppeling. Linkage het ons gered, want ons sou nie sanksies kry op Veiligheidsraad se optrede nie, want die Amerikaners het linkage ingevoer. There must be linkage between Cuban troop withdrawal and implementation of 435.
The Angolan government also had to be convinced.
Perhaps 82, 83, they would say, well, okay, there is some sort of a relationship here. Once all the South Africans have left Namibia, and Namibia is completely independent, and all the South African troops have gone 1,000 miles to the south, then maybe we won't need the Cubans anymore, and they can start to leave because they will have completed their assignment. The South Africans' view of linkage was, well, you know, perhaps once all 25 or all 30,000 Cuban forces have departed and the Soviets aren't there anymore, and we've seen how things are inside Angola for a year or two, maybe then we could have another look at putting into operation UN Resolution 435.
Uiteindelik sou jy soos twee watertanks wat langs mekaar staan. Natuurlik die Kubaanse watertanktroepe is 12 keer of meer as ons, maar maak nie saak nie. Die tanks se water moet so getap word dat hulle uiteindelik min of meer op dieselfde stadium leeg is.
The negotiations carried on. In the meantime, the intensity of the war increased once again. Next up on Bush War, Operation Protea, a full-scale conventional attack by the SADF on the combined forces in Angola.